Kathleen Kennedy died in 1948, and only one Kennedy came to her funeral. She isn't buried with the Kennedys, not in Brookline, not in Arlington next to her brother, the president. She's in a small churchyard in Derbyshire, England, in a plot belonging to a family she married into, and was never fully accepted by, at least not by her own. Her father was the only one who came. Her mother didn't. Her 7 surviving siblings didn't either. For 15 years, the family that built its own myth around loyalty let one of its daughters lie in the ground 3,000 miles from home, largely alone. Then, one summer afternoon in 1963, a helicopter landed in a field behind that churchyard, and the President of the United States walked in through a gap in a hedge, arranged so almost no one would see him arrive. Before this video is over, you'll know why her own mother stayed away from the funeral, what her gravestone says and who chose the words, and what her brother did at that grave 5 months before Dallas, something the family kept quiet for decades. If you leave now, you know a Kennedy died young in a plane crash. Stay and you'll understand why she's the one Kennedy the family tried hardest to forget and the one JFK could not. Kathleen Kennedy was born in Brookline, Massachusetts in 1920, the 4th of 9 children and the second daughter of Joseph and Rose Kennedy. Her family called her Kick. By every account from people who knew the Kennedys, she was the sibling who made the house feel lighter. Jack adored her. Their closeness would matter later, more than anyone could have guessed in 1938. That year, her father was appointed U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom, and the family moved to London. Kick was 18. The British press treated the Kennedys as visiting royalty, and Kick, unlike her more reserved siblings, seemed built for it. She was declared debutante of 1938. She made English friends easily, and one of them was William Cavendish, heir to the Duke of Devonshire. Here's the problem that neither family could get around. The Kennedys were devout Irish Catholics. The Cavendish family had been prominent English Protestants for centuries, part of an aristocracy that had, for generations, kept Catholics at arm's length from power. Rose Kennedy treated that gap as close to a betrayal of everything the family stood for. The war put the romance on hold. Kick went home. William went to fight. But in 1944, with London under threat and half of Europe on fire, Kick went back, and she and William married anyway, in a small civil ceremony that almost no one on either side fully supported. Rose was devastated, and she said so for years afterward, describing her daughter's choice as one of the deepest sources of grief in her life, not because of who William was, but because of what marrying outside the church meant to her. 4 months later, William Cavendish was killed by a German sniper in Belgium. Kick was 24, widowed, and living in a country that had never fully embraced her, with a mother back home who had never fully accepted the marriage in the first place. She stayed in England anyway. If you're new to her untold story, this is the kind of history we tell every week, the parts that get cut out of the tidy version. Subscribe so the next one finds you. By the late 1940s, Kick had rebuilt a life in London on her own terms. She had money, a townhouse, and a wide social circle. And she'd fallen in love again, this time with a married man. Peter Fitzwilliam, the 8th Earl Fitzwilliam, was separated from his wife but not yet divorced. He was also, like William before him, a Protestant. Rose's objection this time wasn't really about Peter's personal history. It was religion, again. She told Kick that if she went through with the marriage, she'd be cut off from the family entirely. Kick decided to try anyway. In May of 1948, she learned her father would be in Paris on business, and she flew there to ask him, in person, to help smooth things over with her mother. From Paris, she and Fitzwilliam planned a short holiday on the French Riviera. Their small private plane took off on May 13th. About an hour in, they flew into a storm near Vienne in central France. The plane lost radio contact. Witnesses on the ground watched it come apart in the air before it went down in a ravine in the Ardèche region. Everyone aboard was killed instantly. Kathleen Kennedy was 28 years old. Her father was in Paris. He drove to the crash site and identified his daughter's body. Her mother wasn't there. By several accounts, Rose was in the hospital in the days after the crash, and by the time she could have traveled, the funeral arrangements were already set in London and Derbyshire. Illness may only be part of the story. Some accounts from people close to the family suggest Rose, still working through her anger over a marriage that hadn't even happened yet, didn't encourage her other children to attend either, so the funeral went ahead with almost no Kennedys in the room. Kathleen's funeral mass was held in London. The burial that followed was arranged entirely by William Cavendish's mother, the Duchess of Devonshire, in the Cavendish family's own churchyard at Edensor, on the grounds of Chatsworth House in Derbyshire. Joseph Kennedy Sr. was the only member of Kathleen's own family to attend either service. Not Rose, not Jack, not Bobby, not Ted, not Eunice, not Pat, not Jean. One father, alone, in a country his daughter had chosen over her own family, burying her among people who weren't her blood. She was laid to rest with generations of Cavendishes who'd welcomed her as one of their own, not with the Kennedys of Brookline. Her gravestone was written by the Devonshires, not the Kennedys. It reads, "Joy she gave, joy she has found." Below it, the acknowledgement of who she was: widow of the Marquis of Hartington, killed in action, and daughter of the Honorable Joseph Kennedy, sometime ambassador of the United States to Great Britain. Kathleen Kennedy's own headstone doesn't mention her mother. For 15 years, that grave sat quietly in a small English churchyard, visited by Cavendishes and by almost no Kennedys at all. Then, on June 29, 1963, everything changed for one afternoon. John F. Kennedy was in the middle of a high-profile state visit to Ireland, tracing his family's roots to enormous public fanfare. From there, protocol called for a direct flight to London to meet with Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. Instead, the president's plane landed at an RAF base in Lincolnshire, and a helicopter carried him not to London, but to a field behind a small church in Derbyshire that almost no one outside the Devonshire family had ever heard of. This detour was never announced. It doesn't appear on his official public schedule from that day. For years, most people who followed that trip assumed Kennedy had flown straight to his meeting with Macmillan. He crossed into the churchyard over a specially built bridge across a deer leap, avoiding the main road. About 25 villagers noticed anyway, and gathered at a respectful distance. He was met there by his sister Jean, his sister-in-law Lee Radziwill, and the current Duke and Duchess of Devonshire. The President of the United States stood in that quiet churchyard, in front of a headstone his own mother had never visited, and laid a wreath of flowers he'd personally brought with him from Ireland. He read the inscription his sister had been given by the family that buried her. "Joy she gave, joy she has found." He stayed for a few minutes. Then he walked back the way he came, stepped into a car, and within minutes was airborne again, back on schedule, as if the detour had never happened. 5 months later, John F. Kennedy was dead too. What stopped me researching this part of the story was a single phrase. 2 weeks after the visit, Kennedy wrote a letter to the Duchess of Devonshire. He told her he was sorry to have missed her, and that all of us felt the arrangements she'd made for Kathleen were beautiful. He described the inscription on the grave as appropriate and moving. All of us. As though the whole family had gathered to review what the Devonshires had done for their sister. They hadn't. Only Joseph Kennedy had ever stood there before, 15 years earlier, completely alone. Whether that phrase was diplomatic politeness toward his hosts, or something closer to a private admission of what the family owed and never paid, isn't something the letter settles. Kennedy didn't leave journals explaining his motives. What's left is a single brief detour kept off the public record, and a letter thanking another family for doing what his own family hadn't. That's the most honest place to leave it. If her story is landing the way I'm hoping it is, this channel covers one woman like this every single week. Sticking around means you won't miss the next one. Kathleen Kennedy has a sister in this story too, and you may already know her name if you've spent time on this channel. Rosemary Kennedy, born just 2 years before Kik, lived a very different kind of erasure, hidden away for 6 decades rather than buried an ocean apart. 2 Kennedy daughters, 2 different ways the same family made room to forget. Kathleen Kennedy's grave still sits at Edensor today, in the churchyard of a family that took her in when her own, for a little while, couldn't find a way to. A small plaque was later added near the headstone, marking the date the president came. It's the only marker at that grave that mentions a Kennedy visiting at all. Thanks for spending this time with her story, and with me. I'll see you next week.